still might not go live. Hey!
Hey, we're live.
We're live.
Despite
Live
my
from Three
struggle,
Oaks. It's
the man kept trying to keep us down, but
2
we have
p.m.
overcome.
on a random Tuesday. What
It
was
is.
the name of that guy that passed away that did Saturday Night Live intros for years? Don something.
Oh, I didn't see it, I don't think.
Oh, it was like 5 years ago that he died.
Oh, well, then I don't
It's not breaking
remember.
news.
If it's more than 24 hours, I don't remember. If it's less than 24
That's a
hours,
stretch.
I know nothing but COVID-19 and riots. So, all right.
Hello.
Hello,
We're back.
so to speak. We're as back as we can be. Despite having been away and forgetting everything about how to run a podcast, because we were super professional before, so now we are
It does
just
feel like we're
just a skosh less. Right?
like kind of starting over.
It does, yes.
So I'm sorry for any
So hopefully
glitches that
we
come
can
up along the way.
improve. This is Something Real 2.0, post-pandemic. Actually, we're not post-pandemic
we're not
yet.
post-pandemic.
We're stage
phase
4.
Are we in 4?
4, yeah.
There's 2 more.
2 more in Michigan.
We're getting there.
Although the things that are
Stage 6
coming
is,
out in the orders don't match the phases that the giver of the orders put out. So I don't know. I get confused.
Don't start.
But we're working on it.
Stage 6 though was post-pandemic.
Stage 6 is post-pandemic.
So I feel like that shouldn't be a stage.
Well, according to the plan that I printed from the state website, it is there are expected that there will be permanent changes that take place in post-pandemic. So
I see.
that's why. But it's the thing about the virus is contrary to the way things play out in some places. It is indiscriminate. Place no favorites. Everyone is subject to the same contagion as everyone else.
Some things never change.
Yes.
My least favorite song from the new Frozen movie.
Contagion. That was my nickname in high school.
Why?
We are back.
We are back. You missed that.
You know you did.
You missed the high school jokes.
Yes. Silly jokes, silly humor,
90s pop culture references, and A Partridge in a Pear Tree.
And much Disney.
Disney. But as we transition to that, and we're talking about God playing no favorites and non-discrimination, right. I think that it would be stupid and kind of impossible to even avoid talking about what is going on right now in the world. Yeah,
it was very, I would call it serendipitous, but it was ordained by God that this happened to be where we showed up in Acts at this particular cultural moment when we were dealing with these things. And I've been thinking through and talking about the cultural moment, I'm almost, I guess, a little hesitant to see it that way. I'm going to tilt this camera forward a little bit. Because the cultural moment that we're talking about is not in its essence dramatically different than other cultural moments that we've had. We've been in this same place so many times. We've been in the same place with police brutality. We've been in the same place with racial tension isn't even the word, racial unrest. We have been in this same place with riots. Back when you were yet a baby, we had the riots.
1946.
The riots in Los Angeles after the Rodney King situation there. There have been so many situations that are comparable that it's hard to look at this as one moment. This is a moment in time. And one of the things that stands out to me in so much of these things is that the race issue, and I use the term race only because it's common. I don't believe in race. And the reason I don't believe in race is because science doesn't believe in race and the Bible doesn't believe in race. If science and the Bible agree, then it just doesn't make sense that social science would get to make up new rules, which has happened in the last couple of centuries as we needed to have racial divide. So we created racial divide that doesn't exist. We have created scapegoats for the racial divide that that are just there. Only they're like putting up straw men to be able to knock them down. So regardless of what happened with George Floyd, it is a heinous crime. George Floyd died unjustly. And I've seen people, this happens every single time we have one of these things come up. And particularly when we see a white cop and a black victim. When that happens, which is really the only time it ends up reported, right? So
Right.
I have a friend, David, who's a black cop over on the eastern side of the state. And one of the things that he keeps saying is there are always two sides. This is what my long time, we've been friends since we were kids, since middle school. And he is my brother. And he continually tells me, I didn't talk to him specifically about this situation. I contacted him after the Ahmaud Arbery heinous murder that took place. And he said, listen, there's a reason that cops seldom talk about these things, because there's always more than what they report in the news. There's always more than what you see one way or another. Good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't matter. There's always more. And we need to have a stable presence. The problem that we run into in our pursuit of the eradication of racism is very much the same as the problems we run into in our Christian walk, in our Christian lives. And you and I have talked about this. I think we've talked about it on the podcast before. I've spent many hours dealing with people in counseling over this same issue, is the expectation. When we have expectations based on our fantasy rather than on reality, then we will always be disappointed. When we expect God to act in a way that some televangelist told us God's supposed to act, or some way that we created in our mind that God's supposed to act, and God doesn't, then we're disappointed in God. Should we be? No, because God never said those things. So we had expectations that were unrealistic. When we have expectations of the federal government, state government, local government, of police, of the military, of whatever, any of these civic entities, that they will stop, that we can create laws that will stop sin, we will always be disappointed. Listen, if you're paying attention to this podcast, racism is not the primary issue. It is a symptom of the primary issue, which is sin. Sin in our hearts, sin in every individual. It manifests itself in racism, for sure. It manifests itself in brutality and violence. There's no question about these things. And so as we deal with it, we can't ignore race. We can't ignore the issues that are at hand. But when we begin to think that those things are, and it's the same thing we've said about homosexuality and everything else. Sometimes Christians are guilty of this. Sometimes the world is guilty of this. But one way or another, when we start to focus in on this particular element as the sin, this is the thing, this is the problem, whether we think it's racism, whether we think it's discrimination against LGBTQ people, whether we think it's the sin of homosexuality itself, whatever it is, anything. When we start to look at it and say, oh, this is the answer, this is the thing. A friend of mine who used to attend a local church here, went to school with you actually, posted it was a string of, I don't know if it was from what social media it was from. He posted it on a story on Facebook, but it was basically reevaluating. What if the Bible, when it said this, actually meant something else? And I had a couple of beefs with the posts that were there, but mostly what it was just trying to turn things upside down, which is typical of young folks, typical of folks who are trying to think that the establishment is all bad all the time. So then, if when Jesus said this, what if he didn't mean anything that the church has ever said? He only meant this that liberal politics says. Or what if, and you can do the same thing with conservative politics. This particular thing is from a liberal perspective. But what if we misunderstood and Jesus was talking about our politics all along? It's ludicrous. And it's not even that the things are wrong, it's that they're short-sighted and small. Anything that we see from a human perspective will always be smaller than what God sees from God's perspective. So when God is talking about whatever it is, love your neighbor, Does that include the LGBTQ person down the street? Yes. It also includes the black person on the ground. It also, we hate to talk about this right now, it also includes the cop with the knee on the back of his neck. We've been called to love all of them. So if I can't forgive the most heinous crimes, then I don't understand Christ-like forgiveness, period. If I cannot, and speaking for myself, not for someone else, because you're going to have to deal with God yourself. But if I cannot have my principles, my Christian principles of love and forgiveness apply when that person rapes my wife and brutalizes my children, then I don't know the grace of God. I don't understand what that is. Does that mean it's easy? Of course it's not easy. What kind of fool would think it would be easy? And it was never supposed to be easy. Sin is ugly and horrible in any manifestation. But we've decided that some manifestations are okay. We like them.
Right.
Even though what makes sin horrible is not its effect on our neighbor. Its effect on our neighbor is part of it. But the fact that it diminishes God's glory is where the ugliness and the horribleness starts. When we start to see sin from God's perspective instead of from a human perspective, then we begin to grasp it and realize that it's bigger and broader and deeper and darker and more heinous and more horrible than we ever thought. But when we continue to try to make the Bible fit our narrative rather than changing our framework in light of the Bible, not the narrative is the narrative. Whatever is actually happening when you tell the story, this is the story. But that's not how we tell stories. And you know that as a writer. Every writer always has a perspective. You can't ever be perfectly objective. No journalist is perfectly objective, so you work at it. That's why Al Mohler was talking about this in a recent podcast on The Briefing, talking from a New York Times article by former president of CBS News. And there's a reason why you have a staff, an editorial staff, so that it's not one person giving their perspective, because no one is objective. Mm-hmm. So staffs should, in their nature, counter one another. There should be a check, a balance that goes on there. It doesn't happen in our individual narratives, which is one of the dangers of the internet, is nobody's checking you. I can right now today, and I put a couple of posts out earlier, or at least maybe it was yesterday. I lose track of time. But when I put that out, there's nobody checking that.
I've had multiple conversations with my mother about that. Hi, Mom. She said, well, so and so said this on Facebook, and it was on a picture. I said, Mom, I could Google a picture, right, type anything I wanted on it. I could make up some quote by Abraham Lincoln if I wanted to and post it on there. And there are going to be some people who probably believe it. Right. And that's
Abe Lincoln said if it's on the internet, it must be true.
Right. So that's a terrifying perspective. Right. But I also think the media, more of the traditional media outlets, are kind of fueling that fire of trying to give people or force certain perspectives on people. You have stereotypes of people who watch Fox News, and stereotypes of people who watch CNN, and stereotypes of people who listen to NPR, and they each seem to have their own little bent toward different perspectives.
Some of that is ideological.
Right.
Most of that is, some people would say it's more sinister. I don't know that you can be more sinister. If you're doing something wrong, it's wrong. If you're doing something evil, it's evil. But most of that comes from a marketing perspective.
Right.
There is a reason CNN moved to the left, because there was no room for them to grow the market in the middle. And so as you see Fox moving to the right, MSNBC started out on the left by design. When you see those types of things happening, their interest is not primarily in getting you to believe a certain thing or getting you to think a certain thing. And I'm slightly hesitant to make this statement, only because I'm not in their boardrooms. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, the numbers have borne it out. We see it over and over. They had a record ratings week, all-time records since these riots have started.
CNN?
All the cable news networks. Highest ever. Why? Because there is chaos and unrest. That's what sells. When things are going well, ratings go down. Right. So you have to continue to spin this. That's why you see fewer and fewer of the stories about protesters protecting cops.
Right.
You see fewer and fewer
Protecting
of the
stores from
right.
looters.
You don't see much of that.
Right.
What you see is destruction, chaos. The world is on fire until we can come up with another story to keep it going. Because it's just like all these ads you see on the internet that are just clickbait.
Right.
Half of them are not even new stories. It's not there
Or
at
it'll
all.
have a title and you'll click it and it's nothing
to do with it.
Right.
It's just clickbait because we got to get paid. So if you watch our station, if you click our article, then we're going to bring in revenue, and we want them to get the revenue.
And
it's not about fixing the problem.
Right.
And that is part of the problem.
And already we're in this situation where with the coronavirus over these past few months, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it seems like, okay, that's dying down. We've kind of exhausted everything we can talk about with that, but it's put the world in a state of uncertainty, stress, fear, whatever. So I feel like we've already been kind of set up with fear, and then something like this happens, and it just feels escalated.
And I haven't checked the numbers, but I would assume that after the initial bang of the COVID-19 and everything shutting down, I would assume, without checking it, that the numbers kind of tailed as far as ratings, because what's left to see? We're bored. We're going to look for things to do. We're going to look for, which I think also has helped contribute to the riots. I've seen a few articles talking about that. I think it would be naive to think that is the primary, the primary impetus for this.
Right.
Of course it's not.
Right.
But if you think this is about race,
there's a certain state of mind that people have been in.
it's just as naive to think that this is about race or about George Floyd. It's not. Some of it is. There are some people, and you can see those. There are peaceful. And that's the thing, is we've got so much of a broad spread, and it all gets conflated. Everything gets seen together. You see these riots, and a young friend of mine was mentioning in my post on Facebook that there are a lot of these people who they're hired to come in to make it look bad. I'm not even debating that because we've seen that in the past. I don't know that that's what's happening now, but it may be. But the part of the argument was, 50% of the people that you see out here they're not even black people and not from the area. In fact, in Minneapolis, the authorities were saying, I have no idea how they come up with these numbers. I think it's speculation, that up to 80% of the people that were there were from outside of the area, out of state even, who had come in specifically for this. Now, coming into a state to protest is very much what happened down in the South in the 50s and 60s. As you're coming from somewhere else to say, we will stand, that's one thing. But Antifa, it's not about that. They are not here to affect real change. They're here to promote anarchy. And I'm speaking more about social things than what I normally do, but I don't know that we can avoid it right now. I just think we have to recognize it. I'm watching it myself, so I'm not taking anybody else's commentary. I'm watching people who are out there for Black Lives Matter. They got the Black Lives Matter on their shirt. They got holding up signs, and they are telling these Antifa people, leave. Right. They're telling some of the white folks from outside, look, this isn't your space. This isn't where you belong right now. Thank you for your support. We appreciate that, but don't do that. I'm watching John Bones Jones, the UFC champion, going out in New Mexico, seeing people with spray cans and grabbing them. Give me the spray can. We're not doing this. This is our neighborhood. Stop it.
Right.
And that's the thing that happens with rioting. I'm kind of spinning a little bit off of the topic from the sermon Sunday, but it all kind of blends together right now. Protests are intentional. Protests are designed by people who want to affect change. Riots are not. Riots are lawlessness. And, people on both sides of the debate are quoting Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King described riots as the language of the unheard. And he's right. Of course, that's
you're getting someone's attention.
That's why you're doing it. But honestly, a lot of times it's not even trying to get attention. A protest, you're going to try to get attention. With a riot, it's like when a dog is wounded, right? And that dog is just biting you, biting everybody, biting people it loves. Everybody is in danger until you can get that dog contained because it's wounded. And all it knows is it's blinded by its pain. We have a lot of people right now who are blinded by pain and lashing out in a way that is harmful to the ones that they love. It's harmful to their cause. And so there's a video that I haven't seen in many years. I remember during the Los Angeles riots, the Rodney King riots, they get called a lot. But during that time, there was footage that was all over. If the internet had been a big thing, it would have been viral, but I'm old. But it's a storekeeper who, they busted up his store and stole his computer, and he's out in the street. A couple of people have posted. I know Ali Bastaki posted it, and he's like, "Why me? Why are you doing this to me? I'm from the ghetto, same as you. I'm just trying to do the right thing here. If you're mad at the white man, go take it out on the white man." But that's not how riots work, because there isn't a thought. It's just, I'm lashing out, and everybody loses. The problem that we're running into right now is even bigger than riot. It's a riot. It reminds me a lot of some of the things that we'd see leading up to the Civil War, where it is a riot that is deliberately fomented by somebody outside of that cause.
Right.
So it's not the Black people in this community who are hurting so bad over this. It's not even Black people. It's not even well-meaning white people coming to protest. It's anarchists who are coming in, dropping loads of bricks or whatever else. All that, there's a million different conspiracy theories. Is there some conspiracy? Probably. There usually is something going on, but below the surface that we don't see. But most of it is out in the open. We can see what's happening. So yes, there are people from outside that are not related to the protest, that are not even in the truest form, in the pure riot, because they are outside, not really honestly trying to get a conversation going. Right. They just want
and nothing
to
will be solved
vengeance.
Without that.
Right.
Without a conversation.
Well, that's right. And that's the difference between
stealing
Malcolm
a TV
X
from a Target is not helping anything.
I'm not exactly sure how AutoZone and Target are reasons for police brutality and racism. That doesn't make sense to me. But, you look at the difference between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Malcolm X had a different perspective. They both were fighting for the same cause. Right. Perspectives were dramatically different. And one of the most famous things you've ever seen of Malcolm X? The poster, "By whatever means necessary," right. With him with the shotgun and right. All those things. Well, that's the exact opposite of the mentality that Dr. King brought in. Right. Not by any means necessary. We will pursue justice by just means. We will pursue righteousness with righteousness. We're not going to trade one injustice for another injustice. And that's kind of what we're doing now. And honestly, from what I'm seeing, it's people like to talk about white privilege. I think it's the white privilege that's creating this. Creating is maybe an overstatement. That is throwing fuel on the fire and continuing to push this divide, and it only deepens and widens the divide. When you see George Floyd's family saying, "Look, we're not doing this. Why do you think you can go out here and riot over my brother's death when we're not? Because that's not right. That's not the way. It's not how we do these things. It doesn't honor him, and it never has, and it never will." But as long as we're trying to figure out who's right and who's wrong, trying to blame the rioters, trying to blame Black Lives Matter or Antifa or Donald Trump or President Obama or whoever else, if that's what we're trying to do, trying to figure out who's to blame, then we've completely missed the whole thing. Because I'm to blame, right. You're to blame. We, the people, are to blame, not because of America, not that, because of the total American depravity right. in our hearts. Right. That every part of our thinking is stained by sin. And we can't get away from that apart from death. We have to die to ourselves, die to our own way of thinking, to be resurrected in Christ. And when the fruit of the Spirit is what's coming out of us, rather than the fruit of our human thinking or our politics, that's when the lives around us begin to be changed. And we cannot change the system until we change people. Is it slower to change individuals? Of course it is. That's why you have riots, because people get fed up. They want to short circuit the process. And honestly, because when we don't have that, we in our sinfulness get lazy about right. it. The riots are over. So, everything's at peace. We're not going to deal with it.
It's a cycle. I mean, it's exactly I've seen people posting on Facebook the past few days, specifically talking about Black Lives Matter. all these individuals, all these Black people who have been killed by police brutality over the past, X amount of years, just doing, this person was just in their apartment. This person needed their tire changed, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Terrible, horrible, horrific, evil things. But eventually it died down. The flames died down from how angry people were. And I'm not saying that in a soft way. Please don't take it that way, because I realize that it's a very, I've been really, for some reason, this particular instance, this particular situation has hit me harder than I think hearing these things on the news and seeing them in the past have. And I can't tell you why, but I've been really struggling with it. I don't know if it's just because I've been so immersed in social media with it, but I've been really struggling with this particular
having the video
period.
Is probably a factor.
I wasn't going to watch the video for a long time, and then I did, and ever since then I just have just been really struggling. But and I forget what you were talking about, but it is kind of a cyclical thing when people get lazy about their sin and they don't think that we have to do anything about it anymore. And on the opposite side of that, I think it's also a dangerous game. If when we're talking about this particular situation, people that believe this isn't a problem, people that say racism doesn't.
That's where the laziness comes in.
Racism isn't a problem in this country anymore. I'm thinking, are you kidding me?
Racism is a problem everywhere that there are human beings.
Right.
Because it isn't
and
really,
not just a black.
It's not really
thing.
racism. We call it racism, and people, especially now, it's ridiculous. I get so tired of the term because we talk about building a wall in on the border of Mexico. Well, that's racism. It's not racism. That has nothing to do with racism. You can call it xenophobia. You can call it a number of different things. It's not racism. Racism has to be about race. Well, for one thing, race doesn't exist biologically or biblically. It doesn't exist in reality. That's a construct that we've created. But if it's not having to do with what sociologists have termed race historically, well, then you're taking the term and reapplying it in a different way.
It's easy to do.
But bigotry is the issue. Bigotry, and that's what makes that's the only place that you really are going to see similarity. I have some real beef with those who want to conflate again the issue of what we call racism and prejudice or bias against LGBT folks. It's not the same thing, but both forms of bigotry are sinful and wrong. Now, that's the same thing if I say I don't like blondes. I don't see people protesting and having things about blonde jokes or things like that, or all of the different things that make us different. When we take those differences and make them a bad thing, that's where the sin comes in. The differences are good.
Think of the movie Pocahontas, the Disney movie, and there's a song in there, and there's one line, and it said they're different from us, which means they can't be trusted. Right. And I think or they're different from us. That means they must be evil. Right. And that's it's a cartoon, but how many people think that way? And
it's so much bigger than black and white. It has always been that way.
Right.
There has been that same kind of bigotry.
Did you miss the Disney references?
In countries all around the world. You caught that on Sunday morning too, right?
Yeah.
And in countries all around the world where black and white was not the issue, but yellow and more yellow was.
Right.
Or this red and that red. There's the same type of hatred and bigotry that white people perpetrated on other races has in other situations been perpetrated against white people or against other races by somebody who's non-white, and that doesn't make any of it okay.
Or that's white people against white people who are gay, or white people against white people who are whatever.
You see it all the time, and people will make jokes about, that's so Walmart or whatever.
Right.
That's also bigotry.
Right.
When we start to stereotype people by their appearance. As this has been going on, I'm driving my pickup truck, and today I'm wearing my normal tennis shoes, but I'm wearing a cowboy hat and boots, and I'm listening to country music on my CD player. And it occurred to me that pretty much anybody listening to this would assume that I'm a racist, would assume this because of their stereotype of this type of person. If you see this, if you listen to country music or whatever, then you are that.
There are people.
That's what exacerbates the problem for all of us across the board.
There are people because you say you're a Christian, or because you go to this particular church that
Right.
they have a certain view of
Right.
who you are.
Yeah, everybody thinks, and there's almost in some ways more validity to that because there's a covenantal aspect to it. So if you say, well, if you're Catholic, then therefore you probably believe this. Well, Catholic teaching is what it is. So
But
you
that's
may or may
different.
not believe
That's
it.
different than saying, oh, you're Catholic, so you must have 45 kids. That's
Yeah.
or Catholics all think this way, or Catholics all do that, or sorry, Catholics. I went to a Catholic college.
Yeah, or Mormons or
Right,
whatever else.
whatever.
So when we stop thinking of people as groups and start thinking of people as people, then we start to see things change. And believe me, we're two white people sitting here in
Right,
a very
I'm not-
privileged position.
Right. I don't
I
want
will
to think
never
we're not on a
pretend.
soapbox here.
Well, I'm on a definite soapbox. Well, there's no question about that. And I have very strong opinions about it. But I will never sit here and claim that I understand what it's like
Right.
to be a black man in America.
Or a
Nor-
Muslim, or a Indian, or a
I will
whatever.
also not claim to know what it's like to be a woman in America because I ain't
Well,
one.
let me tell you something.
I will never claim to know what it's like to be a white man in Los Angeles.
Right.
I don't live in Los Angeles. I can tell you my experience, my narrative right here. And yet the principles of reality are bigger than my experience or your experience or anybody else's. And so the things that we're talking about here do not diminish the difficulty and the hardship of being especially being a black person in America. And I think especially being a black man in America, even more so than being a black woman.
Mhm.
And I could be wrong about that, but I'm saying this from outside of that particular demographic.
Right.
But I will tell you this, there is no ontological difference. There's no biological difference. There is no mental difference. There's no spiritual difference between me sitting here in my whiteness and my brother sitting in Detroit in his blackness, because neither of us are primarily identified by the color of our skin. When we were kids, we used to call each other the half brothers, and so the half brothers are back and the 3/4 black. That was us. So and I just was telling him this week, because David's slick on top, right? So he's got the Jordan look. Well, he can pull that off. I don't have that head. I can't do that the same way. I don't have any hair, but I don't look the same as David does. There's a difference between having soul and having melanin. I don't have that. So we are together. His experience is dramatically different than mine. He grew up in Detroit.
Mhm.
I didn't grow up in Detroit. I didn't go to school with metal detectors. I went to a school where when I graduated, we had like 110 in the class.
Right.
When he graduated, they had 4,000
Right.
over there in the high school. I don't think they had that many in the class. But I mean, it's like a college. The college I went to was smaller than the high school he went
Right.
to.
Same.
They're going in through metal detectors. And that's back in the 80s. I didn't have that experience.
I mean, we went to the same school. I
Many,
mean,
many years apart.
you said it, not me. Kids, there were kids driving tractors to school,
Right.
and I went to a Catholic college. By all accounts, I've lived a very privileged life and a very sheltered, and here am I in my bubble life. I mean, probably the
And that's been hard in a lot of ways for you
It
growing
has.
up
It
as an
has.
adult.
Yes.
Because that's not how you expected life to turn out, the way it turned out.
right. Bring back to Disney. I wanted a Disney movie sort of life, and that's not reality.
Or a Hallmark movie.
Or a Hallmark movie. Yeah, I'll probably switch to Hallmark now. I'm 32. It's time to grow up.
Yeah, it is.
But
nobody buys it.
my biggest cultural experiences is probably going to Chicago and for a visit as a tourist, and I'm under no impression that I have any clue of what certain realities are like
Right.
other
That's
than
right.
my own. So don't take that,
Which has nothing to do with how much or how well you love a person,
exact right.
and has nothing to do with how God sees those individuals or sees you. Every one of us bleeds the same. When you're doing surgery, if a doctor's doing surgery on that person, it looks the same on the inside.
Right.
That doesn't change. My daughter's a veterinarian, and it doesn't matter what color the animal is. It doesn't matter what's going on. When you get inside, it's the same.
There's no racism with animals.
There,
What does that tell you?
well, there's a lot of things, but we're out of time. But as we're kind of bringing this to a close, and we have, and we've gone over, and sorry, not sorry. It is what it is. But we do live in a world full of division and hate. The answer is not more division and hate. It can't be. We can't ever bring about justice through injustice. It's just a different injustice. We're not going to make things better for Black people in America by making things worse for white people in America. That will never make it better. What we need to do is elevate everyone. We need to raise everyone up, and not just with some social plan or by dominating rioters. Now, don't get me wrong, law and order has to prevail at some point, and it always will, because an anarchist society is not a society, and it will collapse on itself. Eventually, we all eat our young, and that's not going to work. So eventually, someone, whether it's the government or someone else, will fill that vacuum and bring some semblance of law and order. 1920s Chicago, who was it? It was Al Capone. He brought his version of law and order. In Soviet Russia, they brought their version of law and order. But there will always be something, someone filling that vacuum, stepping into that void. And for anybody who's familiar with Animal Farm, I recommend the animated film over the book or the live action film, because animation makes everything better. But if there's anything that you can see from Orwell's Animal Farm, it's that when we start to overthrow people because they're wrong, and we take that power by force, we will always have that temptation to be what we first opposed. Right. That's why our Constitution is set up the way it is, because our founding fathers recognized the evil in the human soul, that every single one of us is bent toward sin, bent toward evil. Even those who didn't recognize Christ as Messiah, who were not born again believers, what we might term evangelicals. The term existed then, but not the same, or not the way we see it today. But those, they may not have been Bible believing Christians, but they were influenced, as all of Western society was, by Judeo-Christian values. And what was brought in was a picture that every person is flawed. Government is necessary over anarchy. Order beats lawlessness, period. So when they sought to, I'm getting ahead of myself and into the article for the newsletter. But when we chose to throw off the fetters of the British government, it wasn't so that we could do our own thing. It wasn't for anarchy. It was replacing.
There are no rules.
Right. It was replacing an unjust tyranny with a better form of government. That was the entire process. It was never to bring about the disorder or to undo society and start over. And there were some who wanted that, and they were put down or left, including some who were big players early and then went to France to get in on their revolution there, which became a bloody mess. It was just massacres. So then the revolutionaries, the revolutionaries became worse than the kings and the affluent that they were overthrowing. Right. So now the oppression that they faced, they perpetrated against others, and it became a whole other thing. And you end up with Napoleon and so on and so forth. But that's the problem that we've seen so often in any kind of a revolutionary movement, is unless there is something better replacing, unless we're actually moving consciously into a more righteous position than we were before, then all we're doing is trading out one injustice for another, and the cycle continues. Mm-hmm. That's what we've been seeing in America. I'd love to do a whole podcast just on the issue of race historically, but that's not really our format, and we almost did some of that today a little bit. But maybe
we'll do a special.
It'd be worth doing. But the thing that we talked about on Sunday, God brought us into Acts chapter 10 at this time, as Peter was getting a vision that Jew or Gentile doesn't make a difference. God is the God of all nations. God is the God of all people. And he's called all people to repentance. And he makes all people equal in Christ. You're equally damned apart from Christ, and you are equally his children in Christ. We receive the same Holy Spirit. God plays no favorites. God doesn't show favoritism. He's not a respecter of persons. He doesn't care if you're black, white, green, purple, or orange. He is all about what he created. And every human being, both the man who is killed and the one who does the killing, are both created in his image. And that image is distorted by our sin. Some really heinously distorted as from our perspective. Others maybe not. It doesn't look as distorted to us because it fits what we expect for good people. But Anne Frank was wrong. People are not basically good. People are in ourselves sinful and wretched. And any person, any sinner is capable of any sin in the right circumstances. So with what Peter learned about the Gentiles, we can carry that over to us and understand that God's love is not restricted by human distinctions. Therefore, if we represent God, if we claim to believe in him, if we claim to be followers of Christ, children of the King, then we have to love like he does. And we have to stand for righteousness. We have to stand against injustice, but we can't do that in a way that does not reflect who Christ is. We have to be the fullness of grace and truth together.
We could talk about more, but we will stop there for today because we're 10 minutes over our time. But I mean, I don't even know how to wrap this up. I just feel like it's a conversation that will probably keep going for a while.
And it should. I think that's part of the problem is we don't tend to have conversations. Conversations should keep going. And growing up as a child in the 70s, in the shadow of the civil rights movement, systemic racism in the legal system was almost, I don't know if it's ever perfectly, but it was almost eliminated. It was dramatically reduced. So by law, much of what was wrong was dealt with. The problem was that it was what was normal in the culture wasn't changed yet. That took a long time and is still taking time. I think today we have stepped back. I feel, this is my observation only, strictly anecdotal, I feel that we are more racist today than we were 15 years ago, than we were 25 years ago.
Seems like
more than we were, as I was growing up in the 70s, I couldn't even imagine racism. The whole thing just didn't.
Doesn't mean it didn't exist.
No, but because that was the world that we were in,
right.
we were beyond at that point changing laws. Jim Crow laws were gone. At least I live in Michigan. We're in the Midwest. It's not the same perhaps as in Alabama. And so, but I grew up with Sesame Street. Sesame Street and I were born the same year. And so everybody on Sesame Street, you had like one white person on Sesame Street.
Right. And Mr. Cooper and Maria. And
everybody's from all these different races. And deliberately, one of the things that Jim Henson did was all of these Muppets, none of them represented just a race. Roosevelt Franklin was my guy. He was the one like black type character in the Muppets that were there. Yeah, it wasn't there now, but I think they may have let him go away a little bit because they were focusing on the multicolored Muppets and everybody. You got monsters that are good. You got all these different things. Everybody comes as who they are rather than as their label, and we just got to stop wearing labels and start being people. And that's how God sees us. That's
a good place to end it. We'll end with that. Okay. Thank you guys for listening. We're glad to be back in this format, even though it apparently leads to 45-minute conversation. But we're glad to be back.
Maybe it's because we're doing it late. Maybe that's what.
That's it. We're just a little more comfortable. And we've had coffee.
We are clearly socially distanced. It's camera perspective.
It's all an optical illusion. I'm like 10 feet ahead. So we will stop there for today. As always, I think, especially with this particular subject that we've been talking about, I feel like I'm just cheating to Facebook all the time. Feel free to leave a comment or a message or give us a call, a voicemail, whatever. Send us an email, somethingreal@reallifeonline.org. Because as Rich just said, this is a conversation that needs to continue. And if we have an outlet to do that, then we'll do that.
Amen.
So thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you next time. And here.